Facing invasion from two nuclear powers with combined armies numbering in the millions, Japan's best chance for survival was to fight. But to do that, they first had to draw the knife. This is Japanese militarism, part one of a two-part series. It's extra history. While not quite as catastrophic as Pearl Harbor, the attack on the Chinese city of Mukden in 1931 would prove to be the catalyst for Japan's descent into full-scale militarism. The Mukden incident, as it came to be known, would serve as the pretext for Japan's invasion of the northern half of China, an event which itself paved the way for World War II in the Pacific. It all began on September 18th, when Japanese troops stationed near Mukden blew up a section of railway track near the city. Citing this as an attack on their forces, the Japanese military retaliated by marching on Mukden itself. Despite having been committed no overt act of hostility, the city's defenders proved no match for the Japanese onslaught. After 3 days of fighting, Mukden fell into Japanese hands. Soon afterwards, Japanese troops pushed further south, seizing control of most of Manchuria and establishing the puppet state of Manchukuo in its place. The speed and decisiveness with which the Japanese military had acted was unprecedented. It sent shock waves throughout East Asia and, indeed, the world. Most significantly, though, it sent a clear message to the government of Japan itself, who had actually attempted to stop the military's plans. But while the Mukden incident had been the product of several years of planning, the events that followed were not. In fact, Japan's transformation into a militarist state can be traced back much further, all the way to the turn of the 20th century. At that time, Japan was still very much a second-rate power, despite having modernized at an astonishing rate during the Meiji era. The country's new industrial capacity and large pool of motivated soldiers allowed it to field an impressive military, but it wasn't enough. Caught between the might of the Russian Empire and the British Empire, neither of whom particularly liked the look of a strong and independent Japan, the Japanese government was acutely aware of its own weakness. They knew that should either of these two behemoths decide to flex their muscles, nothing could stop them. And so began a frantic period of rearming. The Army was given priority over the Navy, and hundreds of factories across the nation were converted to munitions production. Steel foundries hammered day and night to produce ever more tanks, artillery, and rifles. By 1904, Japan felt confident enough to risk war, and struck a decisive blow against Russia, knocking it out of the game and simultaneously boosting national morale. But the victory did little to assuage the Japanese fears of Western imperialism. If anything, it made them even more determined to ensure the country's security. A realization dawned on the populace. There was only one way to guarantee Japan's independence, become the very thing it feared the most, an aggressive, expansionist empire. But unlike the Russians or the British, Japan didn't have a massive population or a huge stockpile of resources. It needed both. To achieve its goals, Japan would have to fight smarter, not harder. This led to the creation of a uniquely Japanese form of militarism, one that prized efficiency above all else. The Japanese military was highly centralized under direct government control. Every aspect of a soldier's life was regulated down to his diet. Officers were required to be graduates of elite military academies, and non-commissioned officers were carefully selected for their discipline and bearing. Even the conscripts were hand-picked, chosen for their physical prowess rather than simply being rounded up and forced into service. This intense focus on creating the perfect soldier paid off. When Japan invaded eastern Russia in 1905, it was widely expected to lose. Against all odds, however, the Japanese fought with remarkable tenacity. Many of its soldiers had never even fired a rifle before, yet they pressed their assault until the Russians eventually broke and ran. Even among the officers, there was little prior combat experience. But again, they rose to the challenge, issuing orders with confidence and leading from the front. Perhaps most importantly, there was no shortage of willing participants. Unlike other great powers, Japan's war effort was entirely supported by public consensus. The war with Russia was justified as one to protect Japan's honor, and its people enthusiastically bought in. The result was a highly efficient, fanatically loyal military force. And nowhere was this more true than in the elite Kwantung Army, stationed in Japanese-occupied Manchuria. Isolated from the rest of the Japanese military, the Kwantung Army was essentially a law unto itself. Its officers were some of the most decorated and battle-hardened veterans of the Russo-Japanese War and China. Japan's early conflicts with China in the 1920s had provided plenty of opportunity to hone the Japanese military's edge, and now the army was sharper than ever. In the hands of men like General Hanma, it was ready to strike. When the order came down from Tokyo to take Mukden, Hanma wasted no time. At 6 a.m. on September, Japanese troops stationed around Mukden attacked their unsuspecting Chinese defenders. The reason for the early start was simple. The Japanese had just 2 days to complete their objective before Soviet reinforcements arrived from the northeast. In fact, Hanma knew that he was taking a huge risk by striking so close to the border. He also knew that Soviet support for the Chinese nationalists was tenuous at best. With the Soviets preoccupied by their own internal problems, he gambled that they wouldn't intervene. He was right. But as the smoke cleared over Mukden, it became clear that something else had happened as well. The Chinese weren't putting up much of a fight. Over the next few days, Japanese troops would suffer only minor casualties as they overran supply depots and ammunition dumps, seemingly abandoned without a care. In reality, though, the Chinese soldiers were withdrawing at Hanma's request. Secret orders had been given by Chiang Kai-shek for the city to be evacuated and no resistance mounted. Faced with this unexpectedly light resistance, Hanma's men seized Mukden after just 3 days of fighting. The entire affair was over before the 21st even arrived. With victory secured, Hanma telegraphed Tokyo. He claimed credit for the operation and asserted Japanese sovereignty over Manchuria. In fact, he went further than even that. One of his subordinates, Major General Hata, was dispatched to Beijing to demand the surrender of northern China. Japan's cabinet was stunned. The Mukden incident had been approved by the Army High Command, but no one had anticipated such rapid success. Still less that the Japanese would press their advantage and march on the rest of northern China. However, the army had already taken control of the situation. As Hata marched on Beijing, the Japanese Navy landed troops along the coast and advanced inland, cutting off any possibility of retreat. Even worse, the army had already begun preparations for the invasion of southern China. The politicians had no choice but to go along with it. The Mukden incident had been the last straw. The army had drawn the knife, and Japan's transformation into a full-blown militarist state was complete. To watch the conclusion of this 2-part series, click the link above. Thank you for watching. Extra History. If you enjoyed this video, consider dropping a like.